I have not played Hollow Knight since 2018, and that, quite frankly, is a serious problem for me. I plan to do an over-analysis of this masterpiece of a game, but to freshen myself up, I decided to dive back in with a challenge run. Having beaten the Pantheon of Hallownest twice, I'm pretty confident in my abilities in this game, which means charms like Unbreakable, Strength, and Quick Nail are pretty easily abused to absolutely overpower myself. I decided, let's not touch charms. And magic can also be pretty busted even before touching charms, so we're going to get rid of that too. And you know what? To bring it full circle, let's not even upgrade the nail. That's right, this is Hollow Knight, with no charms, no spells, and the base nail, and we are going to try to beat as many bosses as possible. With that said, there are required intersections that need either spells or charms to get past them, so here is my goal. Be forced to use one of those two things as few times as possible, and never use spells or charms for any optional item progression. Now, if I have to break the rules, I'll use things as minimally as possible. There are also a lot of bosses, particularly in the endgame, connected to gauntlets and pantheons. I'm not gonna worry about beating them as part of the gauntlet. I plan to unlock them while allowing myself to use healing and the spells that I'll inevitably have unlocked just from progressing, and then beat them in Godholm. So, now that I have declared my method of suffering, let us grab the old rusted nail and get it some real use, as we try to beat Hollow Knight with the base nail without using charms or magic. Now, as the run begins, things are pretty straightforward. Our nail is doing the expected amount of damage, so our only restriction is that we can't heal. This does make boss runs a little more dangerous, as without healing, running to a boss and taking damage means I'm entering that boss fight weaker than expected. After all, I get 4 mistakes and I am dead on the 5th. Naturally, the False Knight is our first foe, and he doesn't pose much of a challenge. Since he's leveled for this part of the game, you just need to hit him 13 times to knock him down, and his 3 phases pass by pretty quickly, requiring only a total of 39 attacks. Keeping aggressive and tossing rocks back at him whenever I get the opportunity means that, before too long, I've already come out on top. However, I then came to a horrifying revelation. If I talk to the snail who gives us Vengeful Spirit, she'll lock us in her house, and we have to kill multiple boulders to escape, and I can't damage the boulders without using magic at this point. So we need to avoid even getting magic in the first place. But to enter Greenpath, we have to get past an Elder Boulder, so we need a plan. How can we use spells and charms as little as possible to take this thing down? Here was my initial thought. Go to the Dream Nail and use the Dream Gate to teleport out of the snail's house after learning the spell. Now, if you know the game well, you'll already realize my multiple mistakes here, so please enjoy my suffering as I go about this journey. To get the Dream Nail with our current loadout, I'll have to go through the Crystal Caves. And to get through the Crystal Caves, I need the lantern, which means I need to free Sly and then pay him 1800 Geo. Now, it's at this point that I regret the fact that I had been spending my Geo up to this point, but we need to start at the beginning, freeing Sly. Heading to the bottom of the Forgotten Crossroads, we face off against Gruzmother, and, well, she's the Gruzmother. She barely gets off 2 attacks before she drops, only needing to be hit 18 times. With that, we get access to Sly and send him back to Dirtmouth. Next, we begin our farming adventure. I travel from the bench, killing enemies on the way to this big fellow, who drops 45 Geo each time he dies. Combined with the couple enemies we're killing along the way, that usually ends up being 60 Geo a run, and we just need 1800. And with that, the grind began. And for some reason, after a while, the big guy just stopped spawning, so I started to farm a 6 Geo Aspid for the last chunk of change. And after a mercifully short 20-minute grinding session, I finally got that lantern. The Crystal Caverns were a rough area, as I can't hold on to walls to use the vertical conveyor belts, and the lack of a dash makes navigating around the crystal shooting bugs really tough. Especially without the ability to heal, but that was not going to stop me. I eventually dropped into the resting grounds, the dreamers screamed at me, and I got the run's first upgrade, the Dream Nail. However, of course, you don't start with Dreamgate, and my brain for some reason decided it was because I just needed 100 essence to unlock it, so I decided to fight Zero. The only issue is that you can't jump up onto his arena without double jump or the Mantis Claw, So in order to fight him, we had to use the Stag Station, go back to the crossroads, travel all the way back through the Crystal Caves, and without healing, drop down and fight a mid-game boss. I reached 0 with 2 hit points left, so the name of the game here was Patience. Now thankfully, Dream Warrior health is actually based on the level of your nail. So though the fight was a little slower than usual due to my lack of mobility, it actually went pretty well, taking only 40 hits. 0 went down, I claimed my 100 essence, and I returned to the Moth Sage to be rewarded with a Hallownest seal. It turns out, Dreamgate is unlocked at 900 essence, which is something I really should have just googled before I did the entire Crystal Caves and fought 0 without healing with a base nail. There are only 2 Dream Trees we have access to at this point in the game. We cannot reach any other Dream Warriors, and even the failed Champion, the harder version of the False Knight that gives us a ton of essence, is out of reach without the Mantis Claw, which means we'd have to suck it up. I guess there's not a way to skip the Snail and Vengeful Spirit. Unless there is. Because in the Resting Grounds is the Dream Shield charm, and it's precise, but if we attack to push out the Dream Shield right as the Balder comes out of his shell 12 times, then it'll eventually drop. Now there is a way to damage the Balder without using the Dream Shield that I saw in a TAS run, where you damage boost off of a blob of infection to land a near frame perfect hit, but since you're damage boosting, you take damage, which means you'd have to break the spell rule as well since you need to heal anyway, so this was the method I went with. 1 charm usage. With that, Vengeful Spirit has been successfully skipped, and I've only got 1 charm usage on my belt. On top of that, 0 is already dead and the Resting Grounds are unlocked, so that's one less thing to worry about later in the game. With our first red mark on the board and a lot of time burnt farming Geo, it's time we finally get the dash. Compared to the Crystal Caves without movement options, Green Path was a cakewalk. The Moss Knights end up hitting me a couple of times on my way up, so entering the Vengefly King with a single hit point means he somehow ended up being my first death to a boss this run, which is only a little bit embarrassing. The second time around, he went down after just 11 hits, and we rescued the mighty Zote. It does take a moment for me to remember how to fight Hornet, but we aren't behind on damage, and though not having spells means we do miss a couple of damage windows, the fact we only need 45 hits means we're able to get her to retreat with health to spare. I finally get the dash, and with it, head down to the bottom half of Green Path. The massive Moss Charger goes down first as we hammer the attack button in a pure display of what is very clearly objective skill. He's a very hard boss. We pet him 20 times. No Eyes, meanwhile, is a much more intense challenge, even with her lowest possible health bar. Playing it safe is the way to go here. On my successful attempt, I didn't jump up more than 1 or 2 platforms at the most, and never landed more than 1 or 2 hits. Especially as the fight speeds up, it becomes easy to unintentionally jump into a ghost, or set yourself up so that you can't avoid whatever's coming next. It took me a little bit to get comfortable with the fight, but No Eyes went down after 40 hits on the 4th try. Traveling into the fungal wastes and picking up the Mantis Claw, we have a couple more simple fights here. Elder Hu, like No Eyes, isn't too difficult with only 50 hits required at this level of nail, and the Mantis Lords fall shortly after, with the first taking 42 and each of the others taking 32 hits. We're definitely starting to see the nail struggle a little bit more at this point. But with the wall jump unlocked, it's time to head into the City of Tears, and this is where the run really started to pick up. With the Nailsmith unlocked, the game fully expects us to have more damage, which means fights are going to start feeling much longer at this point, starting with the Soul Sanctum. The Soul Warrior may last longer, taking 36 hits instead of 20 expected hits with the +1 nail, but his attacks are slow and deliberate enough that he goes down on the first try. The Soul Master, on the other hand, is a bit of a strange catch. It is possible to get through the game without ever using Descending Dark, especially since we've already gotten into Crystal Peak. However, we're also trying to beat as many bosses as possible, and you need Descending Dark in order to reach Godhome. On top of that, once you beat the Soul Master, you become trapped in his arena until you use 4 Descending Darks. So I decided I'd let myself use those spells both to escape and add the Soul Master, Soul Tyrant, and every other boss locked behind Descending Dark down. After all, I want to fight as many bosses as possible, though let it be known, for a minimum percent, we wouldn't be doing this fight here. The fight itself isn't too tough, only taking 55 hits in Phase 1 and 22 hits in Phase 2 for a combined 77 blows. It does take a few attempts, as my limited health here combined with one of the harder boss runs in the game, which meant that the fight was one of the first really notable endurance tests. Once the Soul Master goes down on just the 3rd attempt though, I decide to give Soul Tyrant a couple of tries, and after a 12.5-minute attempt, ending right at the start of the second phase, I decided I wanted a couple more masks before I tried to take that dream on. I'll run over how many hits that requires when I loop back around, because let me tell you, oh boy, these fights get long. Traveling through the royal waterways is definitely made more difficult than usual. The central bench is locked behind using Descending Dark, so reaching the Dung Defender means traveling through the entire area every time. Thankfully, even though we can't use spells to get him out of the ground for some free damage, he's still not too difficult, though he takes a little longer with 140 hits. I enter with my health too low on the first attempt, but he went down on the second. With him cleared out, it's time to grab some upgrades. First oh wait, I forgot about the Crystal Guardian. It's the Crystal Guardian, it only took 56 hits, and he's one of the easiest bosses to Radiant, so he went down on the first try. Crystal Heart is first, and with that grabbed, I can head back into the waterways and claim Ysma's Tear. Next, I drop down the elevator shaft and head into the Ancient Basin. With Crystal Heart claimed, we can reach the Broken Vessel. Though it does take me 2 attempts, the fact that infection balloons only have a single hit point means the fight is pretty under control the whole time. We need to land 105 hits, which definitely means the fight lasts a lot longer than you expect, but we got what we came here for. The Monarch Wings. And this, of course, means it is time to explore the world to try to max out our mask shards. One of them, however, is behind Brooding Malek. It's a fascinating experience, fighting Brooding Malek with the tools that it feels like you were designed to have, because he poses an exciting yet not overwhelming challenge, taking 60 hits to take down. He still goes down on the first try though. With all the available mask upgrades, we end up at 8 hit points, but here's a big issue. I'm using spells only if there are bosses behind them, but not to collect anything, which means I can't reach the flower quest, which means this is it. This is the most upgraded the knight will ever be. This is what peak performance looks like. And so with that, that means it's time to head back to the City of Tears and take on the Soul Tyrant. I had already almost beaten the fight with only 5 masks, which means after a couple warm-up attempts and a 12-minute long battle, the Soul Tyrant is taken down without healing. That means hitting him 180 times in Phase 1 and 70 times in Phase 2 for a total of 250 strikes. And remember, the Soul Tyrant has lower hit points because he's so dodgy. I was finally getting close to that Dreamgate total, and so I decided to go and beat Marmu. Should I have probably done Gorb instead? Yes, but here we are in the Queen's Gardens, and this area is a nightmare to navigate. These arenas, when enemies are all taking 10 to 15 hits to kill, are almost as terrifying as some of the boss fights. Wave after wave, each taking a minute or more and having the potential to go very wrong very fast. But eventually, I start to learn the enemies better than I ever expected, and I escape this arena after 8 attempts. That's right, this single arena took more attempts than some early game bosses. Marmu himself is definitely tougher without nail extending charms because the timing on bouncing him around is much tighter than usual. Thankfully, since our nail's unupgraded, he's at his minimum hit points, only requiring 40 hits to take down. So after I get used to that correct rhythm, Marmu drops on attempt 5, and we unlock the Dreamgate. Having gathered enough essence to travel faster, I decide to start progressing the story a little bit. That is, of course, after I've cleaned up the Enraged Guardian, who now takes 90 hits and allows me 3 mistakes before I am dead. The fact that his health scaled with my nail means he goes down on the second try, even with that thin margin of error. We head for the King's Brand, which means we reach Hornet Sentinel, which is a great time to explain how staggers are working here. I need to hit Hornet 140 times to kill her, but if my hits come out quickly enough, I only need 7 hits to land a stagger, giving me time to clean up her traps in the arena. If 2 seconds ever pass between any of my individual attacks, however, that counter resets. If I've hit her 13 times and she has not yet had a stagger hit, she'll stagger at that point. The end result here is that if I focus on keeping the stagger pressure on, she can't set up her traps, which removes the biggest threat of the battle. Thanks to Dreamgate, the run is infinitely shorter, and the battle only ends up taking 4 attempts. It ends up varying boss to boss if trying to go for that shorter stagger window is worth the risk, but the aggression definitely pays off here. With the King's Brand collected, I head up to the arena and decide I'm not going to do that yet. What I do end up trying is the Pale Lurker to unlock Godhome, and this fight goes on for so long when you have to hit him 40 times. Now that may not seem like a lot with some of the other bosses I've already seen, but it feels like a million. And after that, I decide to finally pick up the Shade Soul for the invincibility frames. I could have probably done this earlier, but oh well. Umu is next, and it's really just a matter of patience here. Run around the arena and pogo to get the most hits in each phase, hitting him 70 times. I ended up forgetting to hit record here, which was frustrating to say the least. Somehow, both the bosses that I forgot to hit record on my winning attempt are also bosses that are unique when you face them in Godhome, so we'll get there. But know that I did end up taking them down here, and I'll probably try another run at some point, so I have the complete footage. With Monomon beaten down, we head to Deep Nest, which is about as fun as you'd expect, dealing as little damage as I do, but Hair of the Beast gets collected pretty quick. There's no bosses in the way. Heading for Void Heart, I decide to head to Traitor Lord instead of the Watcher Knights. This is, of course, that other aforementioned fight I lost my winning footage of. And the reason why that's frustrating is because this is a much longer battle than it is in Godhome, because you have to fight through waves of mantises before the Traitor Lord lands in. And as you may remember, these mantises take a ton of hits to kill. And to make things even worse, most of the Traitor Lord's attacks deal 2 masks of damage, which means you only get potentially 2 or 3 mistakes as you're hitting him 160 times, and that is assuming you executed the mob as well. Now, I don't have footage of me getting him on the 8th try, so I did beat him in Godhome without healing, but without his front runners, this felt so much easier. Either way, with the Traitor Lord taken down, we reach the White Lady and get the first piece that we need for the true ending. While I'm in the area, I decide I'll do a little more cleanup before I unlock the Black Egg. Nosk is first, needing to be hit 136 times, and this fight is way worse when it lasts longer. I tried to avoid cheesing him because that would be almost 20 minutes to 30 minutes of incredibly boring footage. It ends up being a close fight, but he goes down on the 6th attempt. Wrapping up Deep Nest, we end up taking on Galien, one of the last dreamers in the overworld. He's able to put out a lot more offense when, well, we try to land 46 hits, but I have no rules saying we can't use Lifeblood, and there is plenty of Lifeblood nearby. Not that I ended up needing it on the 2nd try, but it made me look better at this fight than I really am. Hive Knight is another tough late-game battle, and though he is a tough boss, requiring 160 hits, and a lot of precise dodging that can add up with his spike and B attacks occasionally combining with each other, he doesn't take nearly as many tries as it did to get my Dream Gate down outside the arena. The Hive is a miserable area on this challenge. Nothing ever dies here. It is horrifying. Once that Dream Gate is finally placed, I never have to go through here again though, and the Hive Knight ends up dropping on attempt number 4 just a few minutes later. At this point, I looked at the boss list and realized I had forgotten to fight Gorb. As one of the easiest Dream Warriors, he only takes 40 hits, and that goes about as well for Gorb as you'd think it would at this point. Which means it's time for me to stop pushing it off. I still need to open up the Black Egg, and there's been one Dreamer left for a little while. We head up to the Watcher Knights, set the Dream Gate down, and destroy the chandelier to eliminate one before the fight begins. With each Watcher requiring 44 hits for a combined total of 220 hits over the course of the fight, my goal here is to kill the first pairs at about the same time to get it down to a single Watcher as quickly as possible. I try to save my Shadow Dash whenever I can, trying to walk out of the range of their attacks rather than dash, and always keep away from the walls. Naturally, I still managed to successfully die with only a single Watcher left at least once, but on the 6th attempt, the Watcher Knights actually went down. But with the Black Egg open and only a single charm that was required for progression, and those 3 Descending Darts because the Soul Master ate a bench at some point, we can technically finish the game. But there are still plenty more fights to go, and this is when the run went from a little bit tough to really, really hard. Our first target of these endgame foes is the last of the Dream Warriors, Markoth. Setting our Dream Gate right next to him, we just need to land 50 hits, due to the fact that his health also scales. And that means we cannot afford to take any hits from green here. It takes a while to settle into a rhythm, particularly against the 2nd phase, but after 10 attempts, Markoth fell, finishing off the Dream Warriors. But that doesn't mean the Dream fights are done. Lost Kin is next, taking 240 hits, and this fight was a beast. To call it fast-paced is an understatement, and on top of that, the fight lasted 5.5 minutes without a break or a pause. Now that's nowhere near the longest fight, but the amount of focus the Lost Kin takes meant I needed to take a break after almost all of my attempts. Ironically enough, the biggest step that I needed to take was making sure I didn't dash through his charge. Though it's safer than most other ways of dodging it, it leaves a lot more of a possibility for me to not be ready to dash when I need it right after, or to misread his nail strike and dash into a point of damage. After death upon death, slowly perfecting this beast of a battle, we get the most attempts a single boss took me win. 40 attempts later, the Lost Kin dropped. The last boss to take down is the Failed Champion, dealing 2 damage on most of his hits. That means we have 3 mistakes here, maybe more if we can take a single damage hit a couple of times. Like the False Knight, I need to knock him down 3 times, but each time here requires 72 hits compared to the False Knight's 13. Unlike other fights, there are no reliable knockdowns, which means this fight lasts a long while without a pause. I end up not trying for rock hits more often than not, instead playing it safe and baiting out slower jump attacks to land a few hits in before I go back on the defense. That said, I did much better than I did against the Lost Kin, as the Failed Champion only took 18 attempts. Next is another of the bosses locked behind some of the rule breaks. Activating the Nightmare Lantern, Grimm wants us to use Grimmchild on multiple enemies to unlock his fight. Like with Soulmaster, I want to fight Nightmare King Grimm more than I want to say I didn't use charms, so I allow myself the Grimmchild as I collect Grimm's flames. The first match against Grimm is not too brutal, only requiring 160 hits. On the second attempt, he goes down. The last round of upgrading Grimmchild is the worst, with the Hive location effectively scarring me for life, but give it a moment and we'll come back to Nightmare King Grimm. That said, we have some brutal battles to go, and taking a look at the Colosseum trials, I'm not doing that unupgraded. I know it's possible because I've seen some crazy talented people do them with basically nothing, but that's not what I'm here for. Using spells, I finally let myself collect magic, namely to get through the trials and pantheons, letting me put their climaxes into Godhome so I can try to face down some of those late game fights. Maybe that's cheap, but hell, entering Godhome even required using a Descending Dark, so I'm not going to linger too much on this. I do rematch Soul Warrior here without using magic, and he now takes 60 hits, which somehow feels bizarrely long. Unlocking the Colosseums, I am going to mention the Abobbles. I let myself heal through the overworld variation, showing how much of a debuff this restriction in particular was. Now I'll loop back around to actually fighting the Abobbles in Godhome later on in the video, but let it be known, I didn't realize that the Godhome version of the Abobbles were buffed. Now I also did not do the Trial of the Fool, because God Eater arrives in Godhome automatically, assuming the rest of Pantheon 3 is unlocked. Before I start doing the big names, I do end up running White Palace without healing or Hive Blood. I end up dying once, but things go pretty well overall, considering I haven't done this area in 6 years. So, with this footage in the background, let's just take a look at what we have left to overcome. The Collector, the Grey Prince Zote, the White Defender, Fluke Marm, Nightmare King Grimm, the final boss, and all that is fully unlocked. Inside Godhome, we have Oro and Mato, Sheo, who will still require we beat Flukmarm, Sly, who requires we beat the Collector, and the Pure Vessel, which requires we defeat the White Defender and complete all 3 of the prior Pantheons. We also have Abobble, who I didn't beat in the Overworld, God Tamer, and the Godhome version of Umu. Now before we get to my attempts, let's get to the only one of these fights that I instantly labeled as absolutely physically impossible to complete. Any guesses as to who it is? The horrors of Nightmare King Grimm? The insanity of Zote? No. Flukmarm. Just watch this footage. Now Flukmarm only needs to be hit 70 times, which doesn't seem like a lot compared to the rest of the late game, but each of its flukes need to be hit 3 times, and it is not possible to outrun the flukes or kill the flukes by the time more is summoned. This fight is just not possible under this rule set, so I gave up, used Abyssal Shriek 3 times, which got Flukmark into the Hall of Gods and gave me access to another endgame challenge. The Collector is another boss that was personally a bit too much for me. Requiring 150 hits is tough enough on its own, and I did get pretty decent at the first phase, but when he goes from summoning 1 to 2 enemies to 2 to 3 enemies, things got out of control too quickly. Even when I started to allow myself to heal once every time I got a stagger, there was so much happening that it ended up becoming an RNG crapshoot. 3 hits to kill the Aspid and Baldurs made the fight have the potential to fly off the rail instantly with just some back-to-back bad 3 spawns. Unlike Flukmarm, this fight is definitely possible, and there were a couple attempts that I got really close, but I ended up relenting and put the Collector into Godhome using magic as my second boss I accepted as a fail. We're going to go back to reality before Zote and the White Defender because I want to deal with the Nightmare King Grimm. Now at first I didn't know if I had the skill to actually execute this fight, so I practiced with healing 1 mask per stagger. After all, Nightmare King Grim requires 300 hits to kill, and I get 3 mistakes without healing. But the staggers were actually plentiful enough that off this rule set I won on my 5th try, so I thought I could do a little bit better. I headed into Godhome and I took him on with the usual rule set, no healing. With 8 masks that means 3 mistakes, except that I can fall off the edge and take only 1 mask of damage, giving me a solid escape option if I ever know that I am about to get hit. On my 12th try, after a 10.5 minute long battle and with still 4 masks remaining, I successfully took down Nightmare King Grim with a base nail and no charms or spells. After that victory lap was the Godhome version of Umu, who is one of, if not the single easiest late game challenge under this playthrough. He still boasts the same 350 health, so 70 hits, except now you break his invincibility with an Oma, which does 100 damage to him when it connects. That means once I've thrown 3 Omas, I only need to hit Umu a total of 10 times, which is not a hard challenge at all. It does take me 2 attempts because I had to remember to use said Omas, but it is a refreshing break compared to the other late game foes. With the first 3 Pantheons all unlocked, I did equip Charms to magically blast my way through and unlock Oro, Mato, Sheo, Sly per vessel, and with that, Pantheon 5. I then magicked my way through that, including getting through the Collector fight with Primal Aspids, which was a nightmare even with magic, and unlocked the Sisters of Battle and Winged Nosk. That means I have 8 Godhome fights to tackle here: Oblobble, God Tamer, the Neomasters, Pure Vessel, the Sisters, and Winged Nosk. Now, I didn't bother unlocking Absolute Radiance because I don't want to do that. 436 hits, well, getting hit 3 times at the absolute most, does not sound like a fun time to me. As I mentioned before, Oblobble got buffed. Each would have needed to be hit 52 times, and after 1 dies, the other regains 20 more hits worth of health. Now, it took me 12 attempts, but I eventually reached the end of the first phase, and that's where I realized I had really buffed Oblobble by holding off until Godhome. Now, instead of 52, each of them take 90 hits, and regain 40 hits worth of health after the other dies. That turned this into a combined 220 hits on one of the single most defensive fights in the game. The usual strategies of Abyss Streak failed here without magic, which meant this fight was an absolute beast. I tried 28 times, but this fight just started getting to me. It goes on and on and on, and by the time you've landed somewhere around 50 to 60 hits on the final phase, you're 6 to 8 minutes deep and looking at a phase that you barely have the opportunity to hit once, maybe every 20 seconds. I just could not do it and let it be the 3rd boss that I passed by. I think out of the 3 I skipped, Collector was the most possible because I had some attempts that I felt legitimately close, followed by Oblobbles, with Flukemarm being the hardest of the foes. The God Tamer is similarly buffed here, but the buff is way less intimidating than the Oblobbles. Either way, only the beast needs to be defeated, and in the overworld that's 90 hits with the base nail. In Godhome, it does jump up to 150 hits. Considering it's easier to get multiple attacks in the God Tamer compared to the Oblobbles, this ends up being a huge step down in difficulty, especially since pogoing on the beast is a reliable and mostly safe way to deal damage. The God Tamer dropped after only 10 attempts. Winged Nosk is next and had a deceptively low hit count. Requiring only 150 hits didn't seem like much. After all, God Tamer took the same number of hits. Unlike God Tamer though, I can only hit Winged Nosk when it does its charge attack, which means this fight lasts for 13 minutes on my successful attempt. The infection blobs are initially frustrating to dodge, and I can occasionally land a hit when she gets off the ceiling, but Winged Nosk only took me 6 attempts to finally crack, though those 6 attempts almost drove me insane. The Sisters of Battle are an insanely fast challenge. Not being able to heal won't change much, but the fight becomes significantly longer. The first phase required 150 hits to get through, which is already as many as God Tamer, albeit with a much simpler moveset. After that though, all 3 of the additional Mantises required another 150 hits, meaning this fight came to a whopping total of 600 hits that I needed to land. There is nothing else that required that many hits over the course of the entire battle. Despite that though, on just my 2nd attempt, I managed to take down the first of the Mantises with a single hit point left, and the remainder of this fight lasted for 5 unbearable minutes on just that single point of health. Despite all odds, Sisters of Battle went down in as many attempts as Vengefly King took me. But with that, it's time for the Nail Master Gauntlet. Oro and Mato were up first, and this boss is an absolute tank when you are lacking all the usual damage the players enter Godhome with. The first phase with just Oro took 100 hits to get through. His attacks were all easy to read, however, and as I got better and better at positioning, within a couple attempts I was never getting hit more than once at the absolute most. The second phase, however, was terrifying. Oro regains hit points, taking another 120 hits to kill, and Mato has 1,000 hit points, which is 200 more hits, bringing this fight to a combined 420 hits. And when you're fighting two opponents at once, that makes things even worse. When the brothers are in sync, it never gets too bad, in the same way the Sisters of Battle were. But whenever I mess up and get in between them, dealing with the unique attacks is when the fight has the potential to go completely off the rails. After 22 attempts, I finally managed to keep my positioning accurate, stopping them from desyncing enough that Oro went down. At this point, Mato was a mental game. There's not much room for error left, as I've usually taken a number of hits, and there was usually around another 100 hits to go. The first couple times I reached just the last one, I panicked, but it ends up taking me 27 attempts to get through the entire fight. Now, Paint Master Sheo may have more threatening attacks, but the fight is infinitely shorter, requiring only 190 hits, and the fact that only 190 hits is a break out of this last gauntlet is terrifying. Knowing what each of the paint attacks will be just from color is absolutely critical here. The blue attack in particular comes out insanely fast, and I need to make sure I'm always positioned correctly to avoid an attack every time a moment appears. Like the Brooding Moloch though, I love fighting Sheo when I'm not fully geared up. It really allows the fight to shine in a way that it rarely does when you're destroying him so quickly. He was one of the easier final fights, dropping after only 4 attempts. Sly has just a few more hit points than Sheo did, but his speed meant that each of those hits was a lot harder to get. The first phase takes 160 hits to break through, and the second phase, where you're lucky to land even a single hit on each attack, required 50 more blows. To give you an idea, if you're using the usual Unbreakable Strength nail build against Sly, this last phase takes 9 hits, and your nail length and speed charms will make the hits more reliable. On the 20th attempt though, it finally came together, with a 3-minute and 37-second long second phase. Pure Vessel, like the Nightmare King Grim, is one of the bosses that deal 2 masks of damage with every hit, taking 320 hits to take it down, and still stuck at only 8 masks of health with no ledge to fall off. I only get 3 mistakes, with no space to budge here. Getting as many hits as safely possible is key here. Pogo off the dash into a hit on his back, and then keep on the move to dodge his teleport slam and burst attack, because it comes out really quickly. When he enters the second phase, he introduces his focus attack. This is usually a great moment to heal yourself or use a spell to rack up some safe damage, but with those options gone, it just becomes a very dangerous attack to punish, especially if the vessel decides to follow up with a fast slam. The last phase, where he adds the Shadow Whip attack, actually gives a great opportunity. Dashing over and landing a few pogos and another hit while landing is safe and speeds the end of the fight up a lot compared to the earlier phases. It is easy to get thrown off and take a few hits in rapid succession, leading to a couple very quick deaths, but on the 21st attempt, I finally hit that rhythm and the Pure Vessel went down. And before we finally reach the Hollow Knight, there are 2 bosses left, Zote and the White Defender, but there is a reason I left them for the end. These 2 are absolute monsters in this challenge. Let's start with the 4th of those bosses that I had to give up on, the Grey Prince Zote. Like Collector and Flukemar before him, what makes Zote a beast isn't necessarily his moves or his health, though they are more threatening here than the Collector was. What makes him so scary are his summons. Unlike Lostkin's balloons, the Zotelings take 4 hits to kill, which means the fight quickly descends into madness if he decides just to summon 4 of them in a row and then immediately dive into his hard-to-read leaps. I tried this for a while, and I wasn't making any progress. Even trying to heal once per stagger was a crapshoot, just because of how many summons ended up getting in the way. After 10 attempts, I ended up calling it, making Zote the 4th fight I didn't end up completing. Maybe there's a better way to handle the Zotelings, but combining them with Zote's Wild Flailing is a tough order. I also decided not to try to use Great Slash and those kind of things here, just because they didn't quite feel to the spirit of the challenge. The issue with White Defender, on the other hand, is that there is no stagger or break. He's one of the fastest fights in the game, and is tied with the Pure Vessel for the second most individual health in the game, with the Radiance being the only thing to come out on top. Oro and Mato and the Sisters of Battle require more combined hits, meaning White Defender and Pure Vessel are actually tied for 4th, but I was not expecting so much health from the White Defender here. Combine that with the breakneck speed, and the White Defender ended up being incredibly demanding. My goal here ended up being to try to learn how to juggle him, which you can do with some positioning and good dash timing. Once you land a good juggle, you can easily get 10 to 15 hits off for free, which is huge for a fight lasting this long. That said, I've never been good at juggling the defender, but that's what I've got to do. So now, it's time to get After 23 attempts, I finally figured it out, combining the safe spacing with long juggle sequences. With the White Defender down, that meant it was finally time to face the final challenge of Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight. Very topical. Now the true final boss is a back-to-back gauntlet. Phase 1 of the Hollow Knight takes 200 hits, with his moveset growing more complicated as the fight continues. If we go for killing the Hollow Knight here, that'll add another 50 hits onto the fight, but I at least want to try Radiance. The hardest part about the Hollow Knight is actually when he's hitting himself, because he'll fall on me and deal damage because my nail is too short. That meant I had to learn how to time dodging him stabbing himself. That's how unupgraded I was. Now 200 hits may not be as long as some of the other beasts, so after 18 attempts and unlearning Pure Vessel's timing, we reached the Radiance for the first time, and oh my god. You may get fully healed for this battle, but that does not make this fight anything resembling simple. The Radiance has the single most hit points of any individual enemy, and it is not even close. Keep in mind, every hit he does 2 damage, which means if I get hit 3 times and fall off the ledge once, that's it. Those are all my mistakes for the whole battle, and there are 5 phases. The first one is the standard Radiance on the platform, and I end up being able to get through this without too much difficulty. The second phase is the first nasty one. Spikes now cover half the arena, meaning you can sometimes go 30 seconds or more without the opportunity to land even a single hit on the Radiance. And how many hits do these first 2 phases take? 150 combined. Then she starts to call spikes from the ceiling. This was the easiest phase by a pretty wide margin. She doesn't move away, and the moves are all predictable as you get in 50 more hits. As a reminder, a Pure Nail without charms would take 12. So imagine your playthrough, but 4 times longer. That is the easy part of the fight. After 200 hits on the Hollow Knight, 150 hits on Radiance, and then 50 more hits on Radiance, you then reach the platform stage, where you need 140 more hits. I reached this platform stage about 6 or 7 times, and even let myself heal all the way, but it was still too much. I mean, after that phase, you still have to ascend to the top of the arena to land the final blow on the Radiance. So, the 5th boss I couldn't beat, even after 7 attempts reaching the Radiance, which of course was actually 33 attempts as I had to get through the Hollow Knight every time. The Radiance escaped my gaze. And after just 4 more attempts, because for some reason I got really bad at games, I took down the Hollow Knight proper. Out of those bosses that I didn't beat, I think the Radiance, Oblobble, Zote, and the Collector are all possible. But Flukmarm, strangely enough, is the only boss that I do not think is possible in this challenge, even for people who are really good at this game. In terms of having to use spells and charms, only one was mandatory in completing the game, that one Elder Balder blocking access to Green Path. Past that, I needed to use 4 dives after beating Soulmaster to get back to the map proper, 1 charm on 9 enemies to reach the 2 Grim fights, 1 dive to reach Flukmarm, who I couldn't beat anyway, 1 dive to reach Godhome, and 1 more dive to reach the White Defender. Even though being unable to beat the Radiance was a depressing end to this run, I was still pretty satisfied with what I accomplished here. Outside of avoiding even any mask upgrades, this is close to the top of level vanilla Hollow Knight challenge runs. For now, I've gotten a bit of a Hollow Knight fix fulfilled, or at least hopefully enough to hold me off until Silksong. Now, if you'd like me to post a full VOD of all the boss fights here, let me know. I can do another quick loop around the game to try to get the Traitor Lord and Umu footage and make that a really long montage. So, thank you for joining me on this adventure, and if you're interested in more challenge runs, I'm trying to get a Baldur's Gate 3 run ready right now. If you're a huge Hollow Knight fan, I'll have a boss analysis of Hollow Knight I'll be working on after I finish my From Software series, so make sure to keep an eye out for that one. Until then, thanks for watching. Bye for nada.